Hi everyone, Sam here for Sam Does That. Sorry I haven't done a tutorial video in forever and I apologise, but I am going to be stepping up my game and producing more of these now, so there's that. But first and foremost, we're actually just going to create the sort of ground. We're just going to basically create the foundations using something called LA context, which is from the local authentication library, which is what's going to be basically using the entire touch interface for us today. So first and foremost, I'm just going to go ahead and click on create a new Xcode project, and we're going to create a single view application. Now I tend to pretty much build everything in code. So this is going to be called My Locked Diary. What an imaginative name there. And it's not going to use core data. We're going to set it up with organization name is my name. Bundle identifier is again just going to be my domain, so my website domain, but backwards. Language is going to be Swift, and we're going to be just creating for iPhone today. There we go, just created the My Locked Diary folder, and I'm just going to go ahead and create it in there. So we are off. First and foremost, we're going to uncheck landscape left and landscape right because we're not going to be using those. And we are going to get rid of the main interface here, actually just delete it straight out because we'll be programming it in rather than using storyboards in this example. So I'm going to delete that. I'm also going to go ahead and delete my main storyboard straight out and move that to trash. And we should be in a pretty good position to get going. So to actually point the app so it knows which view control to load initially, we're going to need to go to the app delegate and we're going to have to sort of move some things around a little bit. So here, in this function here, which is the did finish launching with options, we're basically going to want to tell the app exactly which view controller we want to create an instance of and then actually load up, because otherwise it would normally take the main.storyboard as the sort of kind of flow of for the user interface. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and just create ourselves a new window variable. So we're going to go ahead and target the window property, which is already defined for us if you check that out there. And we're going to go ahead and create a new UI window with the frame parameters. And our frame is going to be our UI screen.mainScreen.bounds property. That's the global UI screen object, which again underneath is the main screen, and then you've got the bounds, which is effectively the frame of the entire of the app. So what that'll get is that, so say for example, if you're using an iPhone 6, it'll get the resolution of iPhone 6. If you're using an iPhone 5, it will get the resolution of iPhone 5. It's going to be targeted to the device that you're actually going to be testing it on. So now that we've set the window up, we also need to set up a root view controller. So we've already got a view controller already set here and ready for us, which Xcode has kindly made for us. So we're just going to go ahead and create an instance of that view controller, and I'm going to call it letRootVC. So this is our root view controller, and we're going to create an instance of our view controller by going view controller, open brackets, nib name, nil, because we're not setting it up via a nib, we're actually just setting it up through hard code here, and our bundle again is going to be nil and close brackets. So that's now we've just created an instance of the view controller. We can now set the window .root view controller. Now you'll notice a little red marker here. What that's basically that's Xcode telling you, do you want to unwrap the object at this point, or do you want to leave it as an optional? I recommend here, in this situation, because we know that the window is going to be a sure thing, we are going to want to go ahead and unwrap it. But we can actually dial back a little bit and change the window property from an optional, because we know the window is always going to exist, otherwise the app won't load. So we can actually change the optional from a question mark to an exclamation mark. And now when we go window.rootViewController, we will no longer have that little red marker because it's already unwrapped. The app already knows that window property has to be there, otherwise the app won't work properly. So we'll set the rootViewController as rootVC, and we should be all set to go. So if I go ahead, and I'm going to load this in the simulator for now, just go ahead and run it on my iPhone 6. And I'm glad I did that test, because I've just discovered that I've missed out one little line of code, which is actually at the very, very end of this. So we need to go ahead and make that window key and visible. And now when we load it up in iPhone 6, There we go. We've got ourselves a lovely red background. So I'm going to shut that down and we can move on. So let's get rid of that red background. We're going to move into the view controller now, and we're actually going to go ahead and get the main local authentication set up. And the way that we do that is by going straight over to My Lock Diary, which is going to be our project viewer. Go to the very, very bottom, click on plus at the bottom of linked frameworks and libraries, and we're going to look for something called local authentication.framework. Now, this is targeted at 8 and 8.1 onwards. We are going to create a fallback which will actually allow the app to be able to tell if we're running an older version of iOS and won't actually be able to do the validation. But you have to remember that the Touch ID was only introduced in iOS 8, so anything before iOS 8, so for example 7.6 or whatever, that's not going to work. Local authentication will not work, and you should not use it as a die-hard only way. Just don't use it for iOS 7 apps, please. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and add that to the app. And I'm going to go ahead and set my deployment target for 8, because that means that when I upload this to the App Store, it's only going to be available for users who actually have the 8 update. So there we go. So we're going to go over to View Controller now, and we're going to actually set up our local authentication framework by importing it first. So we're going to go underneath UI Kit. We're going to go ahead and import local authentication. Now there won't be any autocomplete here, but you basically just take the first section, so everything behind the .framework when you import it. That's the import line that you want. So that's now okay. It's not flagged up with any errors, so you know it's imported okay. And the way that you can tell, obviously, is when I dial in LA context, which is going to be our authentication object, that comes up as an autocomplete. If we actually remove local authentication from this line here and actually try typing LA context, it doesn't automatically fill in anymore because we haven't imported the authentication libraries. So let's put that back in. And first, so we're going to create an object which is going to be our LA context object, which is going to be our authentication object. And we are going to call it, let's call it authentication object. And we're going to create an LA context object, open and close brackets, and that's it. We've done that now. So the way that we can now actually validate as to whether the user has the capability to recognize Touch ID at this point. And the way that we do that is by going authentication object dot can evaluate policy, and then we enter the policy in. Now the policy, at the moment there's only actually one policy. So if I type in LA policy dot, then the enum actually only brings up a device owner authentication with biometrics. So LA policy actually at the moment only takes in biometrics as the password. Who knows if they'll introduce more into the library later, but for now in iOS 8 and 8.1 this is the only option we have, so that's fine. And it's asking for an error pointer. So basically what it's saying is, can you basically provide me with an optional error so that if there is an error, if an error comes up, I can then write the error details into that error object. And of course we say yes, of course we can. So we pop a ampersand down first, which is our pointer, and then we go ahead and create so authentication error. And we're going to go ahead and actually create the authentication error by creating a variable, which is authentication error. And we're not actually going to initialize it because we don't know that there's going to be an error or not. So we're going to actually set it up as an optional, which is basically a temporary object, or it's an object that doesn't actually have a value assigned to it. It's only going to be made available if it's initialized. Therefore, it's only going to be made available if there's an error. So I'm going to go ahead and create and specify the type of the object by going ahead and going (ns error), because it doesn't know if there's going to be an error. So at this point, we've actually asked the app, like, is it actually even possible for us to check for biometrics? And naturally, we can now actually perform an if statement to ask if that error exists. So if we go if authentication error is anything but nil, i.e. it's full, i.e. there is something there, then that means there is an error. And the error is going to be authentication not available in this version of iOS. And that's the error we've got. Otherwise, So else, we're going to be okay, that's going to be fine, we can actually proceed. So authentication is available. Proceed as we were. So that's not a problem at all. So now let's actually push forward. So now that we know that this authentication object is going to be okay and we can actually use it, we can actually go ahead and create authentication. We can go back and target our authentication object one more time, and we can actually dial in the function evaluate policy. And again, it's going to be that same policy that we targeted before, LA policy dot device owner authentication with biometrics. And it's gonna ask for a reason. So basically this is gonna be a string on the little dialog that pops up that basically says why on earth why do you even want to log in? Like, why do you want to log in? And we're gonna respond to that with access your diary entries, access your locked diary with a touch of your finger! Exclamation mark. And now it's prompting us with a block. So we can actually tab over that, make sure it's selected, just like this, and then we can hit enter, and it automatically creates a lovely block for us. Now, this boolean is going to be whether it was successful or not. So the boolean is going to be whether it was successful, and the error is going to be if there was an error during the authentication process. The errors normally flag up when you hit cancel. So if the user says, oh, actually I don't want to log in anymore, or I've given in, that's when an error will flag up. So let's go ahead and create a complete boolean, and we're going to unwrap that because we know that it's definitely going to exist, and it's provided an error here with an exclamation mark in it. So we're going to set up an error, NS error with an exclamation mark. And so now we can actually again perform the same kind of function as we did beforehand. We can check to make sure there's no errors, and then check to make sure that it's completed correctly. And so the way we do that is again by saying if error equals anything but nil, there's an error. So that error is more than likely going to be in our situation that there is the user pressed cancel. User likely pressed cancel. And the way that we can actually print that and debug that to find out exactly what the issue is by again I'm going to console log this by typing in println, which prints onto a new line. The error is localized description. So yep, that's absolutely fine. Actually no, I'm not going to print line it. I am going to print line it for now. A more complete version of this would be to turn it into a UI alert view for the end user. But because we're only doing this in sort of debug stages, we don't need to worry too much about that. So we're going to assume then. So else. Great, it went through fine, so there's no error. There's no error, the authentication completed successfully. So the actual verification process, the actual authentication process has happened now, but we don't know if the user's actually authenticated or not. And the way that we measured that up is by going if complete equals true, so if the user did authenticate successfully, then perform the following options. Otherwise, user was not the correct user, cancel. So in the complete equals true section is going to be the area in which the user basically has gone through the following steps. They have a device which allows touch authentication. They've tried to log in. They've logged in without an error, and they've also logged in with the correct credentials. They've been verified. So therefore, they're home free. They're all good. So I'm going to type in another print line here, and I'm going to write authentication successful. And otherwise, I'm going to go ahead and just underneath this line here, I'm going to say authentication failed. And if there's anything else here, if error equals anything but nil, that's fine. Yep, so we've pretty much got an error all the way through except for this one here. So let's go ahead and type in authentication not available on this version of iOS and close that down. So that's everything. That's basically that's our foundation actually all done. And what I'm now going to do is I'm going to push over to my main camera, and you're going to be able to see the actual app in process like right now. So I'm going to go ahead and load it onto my iPhone, because naturally Touch ID doesn't work particularly well on simulators, i.e. it doesn't work at all because you can't scan your fingers with a MacBook just yet. We're going to move over to the iPhone now, and you can check out to see what the app looks like. So here we go. Gonna load her up. There's a Touch ID for My Lock Diary, which is exactly what we want. So it's actually come up with that dialog box underneath as well. It says access your lock diary with a touch of your finger, which is hella cool. So right now I have my finger, and I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to pop it just on the Touch ID bit there. And screen disappeared. Everything seemed to have gone okay. We didn't set up any we didn't actually set up any sort of notification on this screen. So the only way that we're going to be able to find out whether this was successful or not is by going out and actually going back to our laptop and checking the logs. And as you can see, we now have in our console, authentication successful has just popped up at the bottom, which is absolutely perfect. So we can now go on to go ahead and create the view controller that we actually want to appear once we've had this validation successful. So once the user has been validated, whoever actually wants to see the information or the secret diary, now we get to show them a new view controller. So we're going to go ahead and create a new file. We're going to create a Cocoa Touch class, and this is going to be called our secret view controller, because this is not for normal eyes. This is just for your eyes only, and it's going to hold our deepest, darkest secrets. So we're going to go ahead and save that. I'm just going to create it and drop it into the folder, just a little bit of housekeeping there. And so we're just left with kind of a standard sort of view control template, and we're going to put most of our code today in the view did load function, which is really where most of our stuff's going to go. So first and foremost, what we're going to really want to do is get rid of this comment. So we're just going to get rid of that, and we're going to set up the view controller's appearance first. So what we'll do is we'll target the background property, the background color property of the view, and we're going to set it to just a white color, because then it'll just look nice and clean. It'll differentiate from the black color that we had before. Then after that, we're going to go ahead and create a UI label object. Now this UI label object is going to have all of our single dark secret in it. So I'm going to go ahead and set up a variable which is called secret text label, and I'll initiate a UI label object by going UI label open bracket and then setting the frame. Now the frame for this, I could make the entire width and height of the view, but what I'm actually going to do is I'm actually going to go ahead and create my own, because I actually want it to be about maybe 100 pixels tall and sat slap bang in the middle of the screen. So the way that I can actually do that is, rather than just going ahead and just targeting frame, I can actually go ahead and create a CG rect object by going CG rect make, and I'll set the initial X position at 10. I'll set the initial Y position at the middle of the view, and the way that I can do that is I can either half the height, or a more sophisticated way of doing it is actually by dialing back a little bit, getting rid of the size and the height property, and actually just taking the mid Y property, which looks like that, the mid Y property straight from the frame object, and that will obviously get us the mid Y position from our frame. So what we'll do is we'll set the width to be the max X, which is again the max width, minus 20, just because then that way we've got we've got a 10 border all the way around, and we're going to set the height to, as I said earlier, 100. Now the way that one thing we need to do is, at the moment our current middle position, our Y position, is actually set to the middle of the screen. We need to actually dial that back by half of the height. So the way that we do that is by going ahead and going back to our initial point and minusing it by 50. So it's now view.frame.midY minus 50. And now we're going to go ahead and set our text. Now this is the tense part. This is the part where I actually need to take a step back and actually think about exactly what my deepest, darkest secret is. And I don't know how I feel about exposing it on YouTube, but here it is. I secretly have a crush on Margaret Thatcher. There we go. It's out in the open now, I guess. Well, it's out in the open to YouTube, but the entire intention is that it will just be available to me on this app. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set the text color as well. Again, setting the text color property to UIColor.blackColor. And then the only other thing I've got left to do is actually just to add that a single view to the view controller's view, and then that way we'll be able to actually see the label, which is really, really exciting. So I'll go view.add subview secret text label, And I think that's about it. I mean, that's everything that we kind of need to know in the secret view controller. That's everything sorted. So this is our view controller. What we should have really called is called the login view controller, because that's really where all the login happens. But that's absolutely fine anyway. So when the authentication is successful, what we really want to do at this point is actually go ahead and present an instance of our secret view controller. So we're going to go ahead and create an instance called secret view controller, create an instance of that by opening brackets and setting nib name to nil and the bundle also to nil and closing it down. And then what we can do is we can just call a function called present view controller, which is going to be on our main view controller at the moment, which is just called view controller. Lots of view controllers lying around. And make sure you select the one with the lowercase s, because that's the instance that we created, not the actual object. And we'll have it animate, and we don't want it to do anything after it's completed, so we can just set that to nil. So now that we're all sorted, that should be all ready, but we've got a little error. And the reason for that is because we're actually sat inside we're actually sat inside an if-else statement. In fact, we're actually sat in, I think we're nested in 3 at the moment. So we actually need to take a step back. Rather than actually just target, you can't just target the view controller from inside a block or inside of an if-else statement. You actually have to specifically state the view controller that you want to perform that action on. So in this case, whenever you see that little exclamation mark and it says that it has to be encapsulated, but you have to type in self.presentViewController. So you'll probably encounter that. It's a fairly simple fix. All you just have to do is just check the little alert that comes up if you ever run into that problem. But that's about everything. I mean, that should be everything. Once we've validated, once we've actually we basically check to make sure that the device is actually capable of biometric scanning. If it is, then if it isn't, then it's going to show that error, that authentication not available on this version of the iOS. It's going to present it in the console. Then after that, we know that it's going to work because it's passed through. So we're going to evaluate the policy, and if the user is actually the user that we're asking for, then we can then push this secret view controller, which is all very exciting. So I'm going to go ahead and now jump back to my MacBook, back to my other camera, and then you can see the whole thing happening in action, which is going to be rather exciting to see. Here we go. Okay, so let's go ahead and run the app on my iPhone just by going run, and it should be popping up on the on my phone anytime now. There it is, my lock diary. So it's asking me for the Touch ID for my lock diary, and of course, and our little custom message that we set up there. I'll pop my finger over it. Logged in. It took a very, very long time to load that view controller, but it did work. It presented it right afterwards, even after all of that. And there it is. My secret is out. I secretly have a crush on Margaret Thatcher. Don't tell anybody. And that about wraps us up, I think. I mean, now that you know my deepest, darkest secret, I probably won't be returning to produce any more videos after this because I'm too embarrassed. But if you have any questions or anything like that, feel free to follow me on Twitter. I'll pop my handle up in the little title now, but it is just my name, Sam_Pigott. And yeah, feel free to drop a comment in the sort of bit below. And also check out my course, which I'll be releasing in the next couple of months, which is called Swift with Sam, which is a beginner's course in learning how to basically create an entire app from the ground up. One which has a little bit more functionality than telling people about my love for Margaret Thatcher through the usage of advanced biometric scanning. But yeah, feel free to follow me online. I'm always tweeting about various different iOS bits and pieces, and if you've got anything that you'd like to send my way that you kind of think is cool, or any new like libraries or pods or anything like that, I'd love to hear about them. And any ideas that you have for any future videos, again, really, really interested in kind of knowing what you guys kind of want from me and what you guys want from the channel too. So you guys take care. Thanks again for watching, and I look forward to seeing you again soon.